Usually there would be somebody signaling me, but I'm not quite sure who the signaler is, so I'm assuming the spirit is going to move me to begin this. Good afternoon. I'm David Quigley, Provost and Dean of Faculties and Professor of History here at Boston College, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon's celebration. Today we celebrate an extraordinary gift from Bob and Judy Winston that has established the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Directorship of the McMullen Museum of Art. On behalf of this university, I want to thank Bob and Judy for the gift, as well as their support of Boston College and the McMullen Museum over many, many years. Thank you both for your leadership, your philanthropy, and your exemplary service to Boston College. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Judy. Before I say a few words about the Winstons and this gift, I'd like to acknowledge a few of our special guests who joined us this afternoon. There are a good number of McMullen Museum patrons here, and members of the McMullen Museum of Art's Patrons Committee who've meant so much to the museum and the university over the years. We have McMullen Museum staff and exhibition curators lined around the room, including a few who will be presenting in just a few minutes. We have university trustees, trustee associates, and members of our Board of Regents. A number of fellow vice presidents, deans, university officials line the room, and of course we have Nancy Netzer, inaugural holder of the Winston Directorship, and her husband Bob. We'll be hearing from Nancy before too long. It is absolutely appropriate that Nancy Netzer will be the inaugural holder of the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Directorship of the McMullen Museum of Art, as she has been the force guiding first the imagining, the development, the growth of the McMullen since its opening in 1993. From its original location in Devlin Hall to the beautiful new home that many of you were able to enjoy this afternoon just across the way in 2101 Commonwealth Avenue, Nancy's energy and her vision have shaped the McMullen and made it an internationally respected center for scholarship and curatorial excellence, really bringing liberal arts education and the modern museum into a productive and enlivening conversation. Nancy's research, her writing, her curatorial work, her teaching, and of course, the more than 70 that she has helped lead and organize with faculty curators from around Boston College and around higher education are an extraordinary body of work. I should note here that when Nancy was asked to serve by Father Moen and to take over the museum, it would have been natural, as we see with many other university curators, to make this into a place where medieval art history, where the fine arts department, where the worlds that she was so comfortable within flourished and would have been a great museum. But it was her signature imagining of what the McMullen could be to think of it as a resource for bringing together faculty conversations and bringing the university into a deeper engagement across fields, departments, schools, and for that we're enormously grateful. We'll hear from Nancy shortly, but first I would like to tell you a bit about the remarkable couple whose magnanimity we celebrate this afternoon. With the Winston Directorship, Bob and Judy are building on their already impressive 50-plus years of inspiring leadership and support of this university. Boston College's Jesuit Catholic mission rests at the heart of all they do to support Bob's alma mater. They are committed to the ethical formation of young men and women through liberal arts education, and their thoughtfully targeted philanthropy has strengthened the university immeasurably. The Winstons have a long history of giving back to Boston College, and it's my honor to share just a few examples. I could go on much longer. A few examples of their involvement which typify the transformative impact they have had on the Heights over these many decades. Bob, to name just a few, played a major role in our successful Ever to Excel campaign as the co-chair for Southern California, and has been an active, involved member of the Wall Street Council, his many reunion committees, and a number of other key advisory groups across the last half-century. In his tenure as a Boston College trustee, Bob's financial acumen was vital on the advancement committee. I know our chief investment officer, John Zona, points to Bob as one of the great wisdom figures that has guided so much of this university's success. After his retirement from American Funds Distributor, he was executive alumnus in residence at our own Boston College Career Center for 3 years, offering career guidance to over 500 students alumni in that time. Bob and Judy have made an extraordinary impact on Boston College through the Winston Center for Leadership and Ethics, which was founded in 2006, and really the first major new initiative as part of the Light the World campaign, which remade the university. Engaging students, faculty, staff, and alumni in the intellectual exploration of leadership and ethics, both in business and across society. The Winston Center does it so ably. It exemplifies the university's mission of personal and ethical formation. The Winstons also support the Division of University Mission and Ministry, which offers numerous programs for our community that disseminate the distinctive academic and societal mission of Boston College and our tradition. And of course, Bob and Judy have long been stalwart supporters of the Mcmullen, providing the scaffolding that the museum needed to become such an integral, connected part of the university's academic and liberal arts mission. Just one recent example of this, Bob and Judy have paved the way for a significantly increased number of undergraduates to participate in the life of the Mcmullen, exploring the exhibitions on their own, as well as the permanent collection, and discovering ways to share the museum with the community, for example, by creating digital walkthroughs of all exhibits. The Winston Directorship of the Mcmullen Museum of Art will further Bob and Judy's commitment to engaging our students, to broadening and enriching the community of scholarship at Boston College and well beyond. As we all know, the Mcmullen is a true jewel of Boston College and a resource that enriches the entire campus community and the greater Boston cultural and art scene. Endowing its directorship at this moment in time is a profoundly powerful statement of its international prominence as well as its vital importance, and it is an investment in our collective future. On behalf of the university, I want to extend our deep gratitude to both Bob and Judy for their dedication to the Mcmullen Museum, which they have supported for more than 2 decades of its history. Through their generosity and leadership, the Winstons will make a major impact on the museum and the community that it serves. We are enormously honored by their generosity. And here, one last note. There are many remarkable donors who I've gotten to know over the years. We are blessed as a university by alumni and other friends. Bob and Judy in particular stand out as not being single-issue donors. There are so many donors who grab hold of one particular aspect of the university and throw their lives into supporting it, and for that we're grateful. But one of the things that makes Bob such a special friend of the university, someone who's really helped drive Boston College to what it is today, is he's as comfortable talking with folks on the ground with first-year students in an undergraduate program, alumni 10 years out of the university, a host of different constituencies, and finding ways of driving to excellence here in the Art Museum across campus. It's been wonderful getting to know Bob and Judy in that context over the years. And with that, it is now my great, great pleasure to welcome my friend Bob Winston to the podium to share his thoughts on this very special occasion.
Well, David, that was great. I hope Judy took some notes. I don't know. Judy, around somewhere? David, thanks for your kind words. We also thank you for your well over a decade of supporting and nurturing the Mcmullen Museum. You are a resident Renaissance person. I wish I could take your course. Some of you may know he team teaches when possible. Reformation, I think, is your specialty. I couldn't pass it, so I'd have to order it. But he walks the walk, and he's very, very lovable by the faculty. Now, as I stand here, I'm picking up a lot of positive vibes. Do I hear this group or surmise, you want to celebrate? Huh? Okay, let the celebration begin. Let's see, I thought I could best group my thoughts, because I have handlers, don't I? So two focused areas. First, I'm going to recall 3 exhibitions, like a minute apiece, that had a major impact on me at the Mcmullen Museum and made me a better person. That's it. Secondly, one of my handlers suggested, Winston, cut to the chase. Why did Judy and you decide to honor Miss Nancy, as I reverently call her? I'll tell you. Stay tuned, okay? Okay, April 15th is a major holiday in Massachusetts. We grew up here, but we've lived in Los Angeles for 54 years. No one understands this tribal holiday you have here. You know, your post office is closed, your bars are open all night, you know, and but I like to focus on a past marathon, the horrible bombing 2013. And here's what I found we were safely out in LA. and by monitoring reports, there were 264 injured, 27 hospitalized, and 3 fatalities. One of the fatalities was an 8-year-old lad from Dorchester, Martin Richards. He lingered for about 9 days in the ICU of BU. He sat and he got the second pressure cooker bombing. But somehow he said something that was reported and picked up in the Boston Globe. He asked a question that I've reflected on many times. He says, why can't we all learn to get along together? 8 years old from Dorchester. Why can't we learn to get along together? Then he went to his reward. So I guess if you want to seem to get along with people that may be different, you ought to find out what they hold dear, what's important to them, which we have learned over time is like art. You know, Second World War, all the invasions, what was it they took out in cartons to try to get them away, you know, and just visualize what we saw a few weeks ago, grief on the TV of a lady, Notre Dame, kneeling in water, saying the rosary. She was being attacked. So I'm one that says, if you want to help to bring about a little more humanity here, we ought to do as Nancy has done. So let me quickly go through some exhibitions that I vividly remember and actually made me a better person. Okay, 14 years ago, I was working in the Career Center. You know where that is on Commonwealth Avenue. And I was going to hopscotch across the street. It was noontime. I was going to get a sandwich, come back, because I had some students coming in at 1. I never got to it. Because on the right side, I heard a lady call for help, help me. Well, once a Boy Scout, you're always a Boy Scout. So I jogged down there. Here's what I found. I found an old hunchback lady out of a, she had somehow come like Charlie on the MTA, had never been out here, holding on to a telephone pole. So I said, can I help you? She thrust it in my hands, a kind of worn clipping, I guess the Boston Globe. She says, take me, Boston College, Jewish exhibition, Boston College, I need to see it. I said, okay, I know what it is, Zeppelin. So I said, can you walk? She says, I can walk. So we walked, and on the way, here's what I found. She had lost some relatives in the big Holocaust. She herself had lived in the Jewish community for several years, never came out to BC, Chestnut Hill, wow, woo, you know. But some of her synagogue people said, you got to see this. This got to be on your short-term bucket list. So by herself, she came out. And she was, 85 and very determined. So we walked up there. And I was amazed with her faith. She said, Jesus was a Jew. I said, yeah, he was a practicing Jew. Yep. You're Catholic and I'm Jewish. We have a lot in common, Bible and all that. Yep. And he talked, he used to preach on the steps. He was like our first Jewish rabbi. I said, okay, my friend Jesus, Jewish rabbi. But fine. I was amazed at the depth of her faith. And I was also pleased that Boston College had an exhibition that she wanted to see. It just blew me away. Okay, can you handle 2 more quick ones? The second one was something that was in the new Mcmullen Museum 2 years ago. Illustrated manuscripts from 14 Boston area installations. And Nancy and Gardner and Harvard put this together. We had about 180 manuscripts. There were 249 authors written from 83 world-renowned scholars from Europe and North America. We saw early Christianity at its best. Now, I got to tell you, demographers, people that count things, say there's 7.5 billion people in the world. We're all part of Team Earth. Very few people will ever see what we saw. Original manuscripts, 1,000 years old. Right, all you had to do was go upstairs and see them. I mean, it's unbelievable. Okay, one more. Now, I have to tell you, I grew up in a historical town founded in 1636, 6 years after Boston, and I lived a sheltered, cloistered life. I never went south. I think the furthest south I went was South Boston. And so anyways, I go in the Army. They offer me a regular commission, and want to give me some training, so I have to move people down to Alabama and Georgia. You know, they want you to see alligators. Well, you know. So I was up there at the museum, and I kid you not, I walked up there and they had visuals. You probably all remember this. My blood pressure came up. I said, my God. I remember this. When I had to move troops, I had to be careful of the fact that African Americans couldn't eat the same restaurants. They couldn't certainly use the latrines and the water. This was not that long ago, really, the 60s. And it visually came back. So it's amazing what a creative person can visually make available to you. And I'm sure a lot of you saw the award-winning film last year. What was it? Green Book, I guess, right? Same thing. So those are my three things that I knew. My time in when I grew up, there was 1,000 students in my 4-year high school class. We had one African American. He was a sophomore. Hank, his name was, I think. I think he went to BU. And I was behind him. And I remember 3 years in a row, we sit in the back seat of the car, of the coach, and a bunch of cars taking us to the state meet up in Amherst. This is before seatbelts. And we fool around. We go up there, we run all day, but we were skinny and fast. So Hank and I generally were in the top 10, 100-yard dash, you know, so forth, gun lap of the mile and so forth. So he was a nice guy. So when I got into the service, things changed. They sent me down south, Alabama, Georgia. I didn't speak the language. But I'm telling you, that museum there, I kid you not, I looked at it, it was visuals and music, and my pulse rate went up. I mean, it's amazing what you can do. It brings back things. So those are my three things that I want to pass on, because I think I'm a better person because of that. Because if you want to know about other people, learn what's important to them, and that's usually art, A-R-T. Now, my second topic, before I get out of here, is one of my handlers said, okay, cut to the chase, Winston. Why did you and Judy choose to honor Nancy in this way? I'll tell you. You want to hear it? First, I admire Miss Nancy, as I call her, because she doesn't settle for average. Good is not good enough. It's superior results she wants, and you know, she achieves it through people she hires, training them and let them execute. She's an amazing lady, a certified leader. That's number one. Secondly, she does it highly ethical. That's something kind of near and dear to me. I can give you examples in the break if you want. But, you know, she's, I'm sure, has heard my two-line thing, Bob, Winston's my name, ethical leadership is my aim. And she does things highly ethical, and that is good. And thirdly, you know, she's very unique. She does all this with a touch of grace. She's really a class act. She doesn't complain. Of course she could, but she doesn't blame other people. She takes ownership, moves straight ahead. So that's why Judy and I decided to honor her in this way. And so I've known about, we were kind of young, I guess, when we first met each other, about 30 years with Nancy. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to ask Nancy to come up here, but I have a cold, so I'm going to be careful. So as you come up here, Nancy, I'm proud to proclaim at this time to all the ships at sea, all the U.S. embassies and consulates around the world, and to all the U.S.-based museums, particularly in the New England area, that you're now being installed as the inaugurating holder of the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Directorship of the Mcmullen Museum at Boston College. Nancy, you truly have earned this. May you have a long and very successful reign. Let's give her a Boston College.
Thank you, Bob. No one could have done it better.
Oh, well, I don't know.
No one could have done it better. Well, thank you all. Bob, those were just beautiful words. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of my colleagues here in advancement who have made this beautiful day for us. The surroundings are just wonderful and very much appreciated. It would be hard to thank everyone for this extraordinary honor and for all the kind words that have been shared by David and by Bob. And I too extend a warm welcome to everyone here today and thank you for coming to celebrate Bob and Judy Winston and their endowment of the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Directorship of the Mcmullen Museum. As many of you know, the trajectory of the Mcmullen from 1990, when the former Boston College Gallery set out to establish itself as a museum, to today, with a new building, expanded permanent collection, and more than 70 loan exhibitions and dozens of publications under its belt, stems from the coordinated, momentous, and indelible contributions of many whom I should like to acknowledge and thank now. The Mcmullen family, the museum's professional staff, docents, and security officers, the latter headed since we opened by Deborah Grondin, BC class of 1973. Our collaborators on exhibitions from throughout the world, the university's administration, especially our presidents, Fathers Leahy and Monin, provosts, especially David Quigley, who shepherded us into the new building, our deans, trustees, regents, faculty, and students, and of course, the patron donors of the Mcmullen Museum. Proof of the key contributions made by the latter group, chaired so ably by Mike Daly, comes from the example that we celebrate today. Not long after I settled into Devlin Hall, an engaged young alumnus from across the country paid a visit to my office to tell me about a collection of photographs by Ansel Adams that his company owned. He offered help in obtaining loans for future exhibitions. That generous alumnus was one Bob Winston, who with his wife Judy, shortly thereafter joined the group of our fledgling museum's earliest supporters, close advisors, and trusted friends. And I'm so pleased that many from that original group have honored us with their presence today. Decades later, when we were anticipating moving into our new building, the Winstons suggested that the Mcmullen use the proceeds from an undesignated gift to the museum to launch a new program for student involvement. So Bob and Judy and the Mcmullen team started sharing ideas, many coming from innovative programs at Los Angeles museums like the Broad and the Getty, which Bob and Judy frequent. These deliberations resulted in establishing at the Mcmullen what has now become the Winston's second successful student ambassador program on the Boston College campus, the first having been piloted in the Winston Center for Leadership and Ethics. As we evaluate together how to improve our joint project, especially now that the art history major at Boston College has launched a new museum studies concentration, discussions continue among the Winstons, our student ambassadors, and their head, our manager of education, Rachel Chamberlain. The Winstons encourage critical reflection as we seek each year to improve the student experience. It would be hard to overemphasize how much all of us at the Mcmullen have enjoyed collaborating with Bob and Judy on this project, and how much it gladdens my heart to be the inaugural occupant of a chair that bears their names. I'd like to take this moment to personally thank Bob and Judy for their many contributions to the Mcmullen, especially those which have helped activate the museum as a space where lively faculty minds and engaging objects meet the intellectual and creative veracity of students. Our museum ambassadors exemplify those young minds, and I've asked two of them to help me present a special gift from all of us associated with the museum to express our gratitude. Judy and Bob. So thank you. In tribute to the Mcmullen Museum's ongoing discourse with the Winstons and others in our community, I thought we might use this gathering to reflect on how the landscape in which museums operate has evolved over the past 3 decades, and how some of those changes resonate with the Mcmullen. Of particular interest is gaining a clearer understanding of how museums might shape research and programming to best serve young and increasingly diverse audiences, and how technological innovations, the internet, and social media might be utilized to serve needs of larger audiences, many of whom are not on site. We now have the potential to expand educational access to people who will never come through our doors. The last time we took note, the Mcmullen website had had interaction from 62 countries. Viewers virtually walk through our exhibitions by the hundreds with curators on Facebook Live tours. Equal numbers from all over the world via live stream, archive, and podcast attend programs and interact with our lecturers who impart their new discoveries. Such changes mean that a small museum outside a world capital now has the potential to receive global attention almost immediately for contributions it makes to a range of disciplines. This was not the case when the Mcmullen charted its mission in the early 1990s. The emergence of such possibilities clears the path and provides incentive for an academic museum in a top-tier R1 research university like ours to explore how enhancing collaborative scholarly initiatives across our parent university might best contribute to its museum's generation of knowledge and to global education. Before considering the Mcmullen's mission in the years ahead, it will be helpful to rehearse briefly how the museum's present remit emerged. What greeted me as I became an assistant professor of art history in what was then called the Fine Arts Department, and the founding director of a museum of art in 1990, was an unusual set of circumstances. Over the previous century, Boston College accrued works of art, neither purposefully nor systematically, and primarily as donations, to enhance the ambiance of its signature neo-Gothic buildings. By the late 20th century, most of those buildings had been emptied to undergo renovation, relegating many of those works of art to homeless orphan status. When my predecessors in the department, Stoney Conley and Michael Mulhern, rescued and gathered these works in a safe place, they discovered many had fallen into neglect and were in need of conservation. The new museum proceeded to do what it could to revive the most worthy among them and to remedy the most urgent problems. Several of those conservation projects rewarded the university with surprises, bringing significant paintings to light. But in looking over the assemblage, everyone agreed then that the extent and quality of those holdings eluded shaping into a narrative worthy of permanent display. The flip side of that realization was that it presented an opportunity to rethink the traditional model for academic museums, dominated by a permanent collection used principally for art historical instruction and questions posed by art historians. Boston College had, and still has, a large faculty of more than 1,500 members. A small number have research interests in art per se, but many were and are engaged in research that focuses on the interpretation of the types of messages conveyed by works of art and material culture. It became clear that our faculty was then and remains the best resource on which our museum with a small staff can draw, and that a new museum presented an opportunity to contribute to the generation of knowledge without disciplinary constraints. So, in 1993, Boston College opted to embark on what I like to call the Mcmullen Experiment, to test whether a university could engage faculty from different disciplines to work together in research teams in order to originate groundbreaking exhibitions. The results of that experiment are now in and speak for themselves. For more than a quarter century now, these communities of scholars have organized highly acclaimed Leone exhibitions, most accompanied by peer-reviewed volumes of essays. Our exhibitions have succeeded in crossing methodological frontiers by examining a chosen group of works through the lenses of different disciplines. Because exhibitions, especially, reach a larger audience than do scholarly publications, even in a small university museum like ours, they have taken advantage of the ability to force, through powerful physical presence and intelligently designed installations, a consideration of unexamined and overlooked areas of art and the material world. About 4 or 5 years before an exhibition opens, our curatorial teams start with our staff and a core group of scholars from fields that have ranged from philosophy to physics. We pool our collective knowledge about possible loans and their sources, contemplate themes to be investigated, and narratives to be developed in the exhibition. And we consider other scholars whom we'd like to invite to offer expertise. Faculty often begin teaching courses related to their research for the exhibition, thereby engaging students in the exhibition process from the beginning. Now, since the museum mapped its mission and operating procedures, our toolkit has grown. First, through the generosity of donors in recent years, we have increased our permanent collection, especially in the areas of American art, photography, and early medieval textiles. Our own objects now serve empirical study and research by faculty and students, and as core components around which to organize exhibitions. Second, we have witnessed not just among our faculty, but within the humanities and social sciences in general, increasing interest and willingness to interrogate material artifacts as evidentiary documents. In many fields, this methodology sits on the cutting edge, and thus involves our assuming some risk when assembling our research teams. But as a university, we are primarily dedicated to education and the search for truth. After all, we baked an element of risk into our museum mission from the start. Implicitly, we accepted that if our research methods were to be innovative and sound, all conclusions presented by our exhibition projects could not be known at the outset of planning. Third, introduction of new technologies during the intervening years has contributed to those unknowns and demands integration into our vision for the future. I speak especially about the range of multimedia innovations that make it possible to tell more comprehensive and compelling immersive stories in juxtaposition with objects in our galleries. Robin Leidenberg and Ash Anderson's exhibition of Carrie Mae Reams's work last fall allowed our assistant director, Diana Larson, to test successfully our capacity for using three-dimensional imagery that immerses the viewer in an alternative physical space. Expanding our use of immersive technologies next year in an exhibition curated by history professor Prasnan Partharasati, featuring contemporary artists who address climate change and migration around the Indian Ocean, we will draw in faculty colleagues from earth and environmental sciences and computer science to help tell a compelling scientific story alongside the artistic one. Embedding new technologies in the conception of our exhibitions and publications hold out the possibility for leveling the playing field to engage groups often underrepresented among museum audiences. It requires seats at the planning table for a new group of colleagues in computer sciences, engineering, and communications to collaborate with our didactics specialists, John McCoy and Kate Shugart. Fourth, another area that clamors for more structured, synergistic engagement stems from a method of investigation growing in popularity over the past few decades, often referred to in a range of social science and humanities disciplines as the material turn. Much of this inquiry centers on how methodologies traditionally employed by art historians, which have for over a century determined questions posed of artifacts and the narratives into which they are woven in museum installations, could and should be expanded to tell a fuller story of the world's material culture. As curators, art historians have tended to focus their lenses on an object's visual qualities. They decode messages they impart and analyze how those messages have been perceived over time and how they fit into the grand global developmental narrative art historians themselves have constructed. For the most part, until the end of the last century, academic museums, whether stewards of large or more modest collections, followed this model and sought to engage with their audiences around issues central to traditional art historical inquiry. With the material turn, scholars from other disciplines enter the discourse, amplifying the conventional model. Underpinning the material turn in text-based disciplines is the belief that even the most abstract ideas may be exemplified in things. Many of the precepts of the material turn were codified as early as 1982 in a wide-reaching essay by renowned Yale professor Jules Prown, where he outlined methods for placing the materiality of all types of objects, from high to low, as a focus for their substantive, formal, and symbolic scrutiny. More recently, many art historians have jumped on board, advocating this broader approach as a way of widening the discipline's relevance and linking it more deeply to research throughout the academy. Such expansion in the canon of works to be investigated and in the questions asked of them naturally has significant ramifications for the display of objects in museums, and especially for those associated with research universities, such as ours. For example, two colleagues, historian Robin Fleming and classicist Gail Hoffman, forged new lines of inquiry into various quotidian objects to make groundbreaking contributions to understanding of human experience in late antiquity in the Mcmullen's Dura Europos and Roman in the Provinces exhibitions. Conversely, in studying a painting misattributed to Raphael in the Mcmullen Permanent Collection, my colleague in art history, Stephanie Leone, adopted a method devised by an anthropologist, Igor Kopytov, that applies the concepts of human biography to the life cycle of objects and other commodities. She demonstrated how various cultural forces intervened over more than 2 centuries to alter the painting's attribution, status, and perception as it moved from Verona to Paris, New York, Boston, Boston College, and now to the first floor of the Mcmullen's building. Finally, a major initiative on our campus has opened up additional possibilities, inspiring the Mcmullen to amp up its response to the material turn. I'm speaking about the Schiller Institute for Integrated Science and Society, the university's newest endeavor to foster collaborative projects among the sciences, humanities, and social sciences. A plethora of new technologies with which to examine, generate, and display data about objects, and heightened scrutiny of interventions on objects over their lifetimes are recent developments that have led scholars to demonstrate various ways that latent knowledge may be extracted from artifacts. In the Schiller Institute, Mcmullen Exhibition collaborators will now have additional resources to analyze the scientific aspects of materials used in the production of art, to reveal what I like to call the unknown unknown, evidence of stories embedded in materials like paper, pigment, stones, and woods, from which works of art were created. For example, access to instruments measuring electromagnetic radiation, X-rays, and digital microscopy that can magnify an object up to 2,000 times its size should allow faculty and students to probe deeper into the components and manufacturing methods of objects, like the BC Eagle on display now, revealing the artist's skill down to the minutest detail. And given the unstable nature of materials from which works of art are created, partnering with our colleagues in the natural sciences presents opportunities to uncover changes in the appearance of objects over time, thereby altering their interpretation from various perspectives. It goes without saying that multiple approaches among collaborators to extracting dormant information from the same objects has the potential to uncover multivalent, complex, and nuanced meanings, thereby charting new ground and enlivening dialogue with far-reaching ramifications in our displays. We have done this successfully in past Mcmullen exhibitions, and in the future endeavor to ride the crest of the material turn wave with our faculty. With that thought, I shall pass the discussion to 4 of my esteemed colleagues, each trained in a different discipline, and each of whom has worked on multiple projects with the Mcmullen Museum. Each stands as an exemplar of wisdom and enlightened progressive humanism. They are women of letters whose scholarship has broad implications for our collective understanding of the human condition. My department chair in art history, Stephanie Leone, will serve as moderator. She has worked on the Mcmullen Secular Sacred and Beyond Words exhibitions, organized the Mcmullen Symposium, and edited the accompanying volume, Pamphili and the Arts, and most recently has written the biography of a painting in our permanent collection, which she rediscovered. Next will be Professor Robin Leidenberg from the English department, who conceived and curated both the Dorothy Cross, Gone, and Carrie Mae Weems Strategies of Engagement exhibitions. The next speaker will be Gail Hoffman, a classicist and archaeologist who curated the Dura Europus and Roman in the Provinces exhibitions. And finally, Professor Robin Fleming, an historian who contributed to the Memory and the Middle Ages, Airland, Making History, and Roman in the Provinces exhibitions. Before I turn over the program to them, I would like to reiterate my appreciation to Bob and Judy Winston, who have done so much to ensure the potential for realization of the ideas we generate today, for harnessing our university's unique potential to be a leader in museum pedagogy, investigative practice, and presentation. These goals harmonize with the university's commitment to the search for truth, generation of knowledge, and education through an open exchange of ideas. The Mcmullen shares in the Winston's hope that if we present future generations of students with the best ideas and tools, those students will go on to put them in the service of a better future for all of us. Bob and Judy, thank you again for your vision, your support, and for allowing me to be the inaugural recipient of the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Directorship of the Mcmullen Museum. I'm deeply honored by that.
Well, thank you, Nancy, for your very thoughtful comments and thought-provoking comments on the history, mission, and accomplishments of the Mcmullen Museum. I'd like to respond briefly to Nancy's comments, largely from my perspective as the chair of Art, History, and Film, and then I will invite each of our panelists to come up and share their thoughts and then join me over here just in case we have another moment to extend this conversation. But let me begin by saying that it's such a great honor to participate in this celebration of Nancy Netzer as the inaugural Winston Director of the Mcmullen Museum and Professor of Art History. Since my arrival at Boston College, I have worked closely with Nancy through teaching, research, and museum projects. I have stood in awe of her tireless dedication to excellence, as Bob pointed out, excellence as both the Mcmullen Director and Professor of Art History. And I feel quite confident in saying that the Mcmullen Museum is the acclaimed institution that it has become because of Nancy's vision and dedication. For more than a quarter century, Nancy has been making the humanities visible to the Boston College community and far beyond. Her astute vision discerned the potential of interdisciplinary studies and the material turn ahead of their diffusion. Nancy has been instrumental in realizing this vision, not only at the Mcmullen, but also in our Department of Art History, and Film. Nancy and her faculty collaborators, and I'm happy to say that I have been one of them, have taught courses on museum exhibitions on a wide range of topics: late antique Roman art, medieval manuscripts, Italian Baroque paintings, Belgian painting, Latin American modern art, Irish art, photography, Islamic art, Japanese decorative arts, and much, much more. Our students have benefited from studying these diverse subjects, as well as learning about the history and philosophy of museums and the intellectual and creative process of curating exhibitions. As Nancy mentioned, through Bob and Judy Winston's great generosity, the Mcmullen Museum now provides professional museum experience for BC students who are majoring in diverse subjects and diverse disciplines. More recently, Nancy has been instrumental in shaping the present and future of the art history curriculum. With her critical guidance, we have created a museum studies concentration within the art history major. It allows students to explore this field of study and prepare for graduate studies and careers in the arts. A key component of this curriculum is our new course on the materials of art and their conservation. This course, which will begin in the fall, will be taught by Richard Newman, Chief Scientist at the Museum of Fine Arts. And he's working with our faculty to coordinate the materials and artworks that he will teach in his course with the kinds of subjects that we teach in ours. For instance, I'm very excited to have him analyze the pigments of the Madonna and Child painting, which Nancy mentioned. This is the painting that I have been studying, and I think that we may be able to further the interpretation by looking at it through scientific analysis. So the understanding of materials, as Nancy has so nicely illuminated, and how these materials possess evidence about the artist's making and meaning, and how these materials can change over time. These things are essential for our students to understand and to learn in our increasingly visual world. So this leads us back to Nancy's rich summary of the material turn. This material turn combines the study of materiality, interdisciplinary methods, and scientific analysis. And what I'd like to do now is to ask each of my faculty colleagues to come up and share their very unique and experienced perspectives of their work as Mcmullen curators and Boston College faculty. And I'll ask Professor Robin Leidenberg to start us off.
Hi, everyone. I find myself suspended somewhere between, on the one hand, the linguistic turn of the 1970s that took many disciplines in a rather literary and theoretical direction, and on the other hand, the material turn of the 1990s that sought to restore the physicality of art objects as made things. As a literature professor, my initial engagements with visual material tended to focus on avant-garde interdisciplinary movements and on conceptual art more generally. But over the course of my involvement with several exhibitions at the Mcmullen Museum, the visual arts were brought to life for me not merely as philosophical tropes, but as objects embodying the history of their making and their reception. I took the material turn along with Nancy. I became obsessed, in fact, with the work of the Irish artist, contemporary Irish artist Dorothy Cross, who is particularly deeply immersed in the transformation of objects like cows' udders or whales' skeletons, giving them always new lives and new functions. In 2005, Nancy took a deep leap of faith, supporting the exhibition I curated on Cross's temporary site-specific installations. Now, because all of these works were gone, in effect, their materiality could only be mediated by documentary representation in photographs and videos. Nevertheless, working on the museum exhibition made me much more attuned to the physicality of Cross's art, and I did subsequently write an essay dealing with the centrality of touch in her work. The Carrie Mae Weems exhibition, which I co-curated with Nancy's colleague, Ash Anderson, this fall, certainly exemplified the possibility of a fruitful convergence of the linguistic turn and the material turn. And this not just because of the combination of Ash and myself, but in the work. Weems often works with historic photographic archives, and in her process of layering written or spoken text over these images and manipulating them in various other ways, she demonstrates how such material evidence can be transformed. Its original intentions and meanings can be contested. For artists like Cross and Weems, it seems, the materiality of objects is never so fixed that it cannot be radically altered. Nancy's support and encouragement for both of these projects has completely transformed the final 2 decades of my 47-year career at Boston College and has opened up territory that I will certainly continue to pursue in my retirement, which begins Thursday. Thank you.
Robin, thank you for illustrating how how materiality can be used to demonstrate abstract ideas and this nice connection between the linguistic and the material world. Let me now turn to Professor Gail Hoffman from Classics.
Thank you. Study of materiality, interdisciplinary methods, and scientific analyses, just mentioned by Professor Leone, are pillars of archaeological research. I explore prehistoric Greece to understand the mobility of objects, people, and ideas within the Eastern Mediterranean. The only evidence is material culture. I use methods from art history, anthropology, and history to interpret objects, and would use scientific studies such as strontium analysis to identify the movement of people, or mass spectrometry and microscopic analyses to reveal workshop traditions. Often, my research is a solitary endeavor, reaching a few scholars and students in my classes. That changed when I joined Nancy Netzer for a Mcmullen exhibition about Dura Europos, a multicultural ancient site in eastern Syria. Nancy, as you all know, functions as the brain, you know, the central structure that coordinates everything, and I mean everything. In her exhibitions, Nancy is yet again ahead of the curve, not only understanding the material turn, but also recognizing the leadership role that academic museums play in reaching across disciplines within the university and in engaging with the world beyond it. This is vital for the future. As the sciences become more integrated, partly because we're edging closer to a holistic understanding of human beings and our world, at the same time, physical objects that record the human past are under critical threat. Dura Europos on the Syria-Iraq border was utterly destroyed by the recent occupation. What remains is legacy data housed in museums. The future is going to require a culture conservancy effort as substantial as that mounted to save our natural world. And university museums led by people like Nancy Netzer will be essential to these efforts. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Bob and Judy Winston, for recognizing that.
Thank you, Gail, for telling us about how we study the past when we have only materials and we don't have language. And also thank you for reminding us of the urgency of studying the past and preserving the past and what we can do as a university museum to do that. Let me now ask Professor Robin Fleming from the History Department.
So I also work in a time and a place that has no written records, so I also very much depend on the material. But today I don't want to talk so much about what I do and how the museum has helped me do it, but to police Nancy's language a little bit. We spend a lot of time in history helping our students write better, and one of the things they use is they use the passive a lot because they're afraid to assign the person who's responsible for doing whatever is being done. Nancy, however, has used the passive today as an act of modesty. And many of the things that she talked about as happening around the Mcmullen Museum happened because of her. So it's a thrill to be here and really thrilling to witness Nancy's long overdue apotheosis to name directorship. I came to BC a year before Nancy, and I vividly remember our first meeting. We're both insular scholars. We work on early Britain, and I was excited that she was here, and she invited me to her office. So I had to walk across the weeds. She had been put in a wooden outbuilding behind Conley House because, of course, although she'd been hired as the director of the Boston College Museum, we didn't have one. So there she was in this kind of garage-like building. And it's hard to believe a couple of decades on, scores of exhibitions on, and a great, big, beautiful new museum later, that she's built an extraordinary institution that is the Mcmullen Museum of Art. And she did it. And even though she talks about it happening, she did it. Nancy's conception from the beginning, which again is her act of genius, was that a university museum is going to be a place where groups of faculty across disciplines could come together each year, collaborate, learn and research cooperatively, and produce original, arresting exhibits alongside scholarly catalogs that together would teach our students, inform interested readers, and give faculty an opportunity to participate in meaningful research and especially public engagement, which a lot of us hadn't done before. And what a vision. For those of us who've been lucky enough to have collaborated on Mcmullen museums, to learn from colleagues in other departments and to teach our students from shows that are centered on the Mcmullen, it's been quite a ride, and it's been transformative for Boston College. Now, there's a lot of talk across this university today, like there is across a lot of universities today, about the importance of collaboration and interdisciplinarity. Indeed, these two ideas are two of the pillars which Boston College's new, exciting core curriculum actually rests upon. But I'd like to point out that the Mcmullen, under Nancy's leadership, was doing what the core is doing now, that is being purposely and meaningfully interdisciplinary and collaborative 2 decades before the core followed suit. So it really started in the museum, and then it reached out into other parts of the university. The Mcmullen Museum under Nancy's leadership has been the place for students and faculty who are often very siloed in their own departments to come together, to come to know one another, and to learn from one another. So the museum isn't just a museum, it's crucially important as a social and intellectual space for the Boston College community. For the last quarter century, it's not just BC students and faculty who've benefited from Nancy's work. Scholars from across the planet, returning alumni, our Brighton and Newton neighbors, and the public at large have profited from Mcmullen exhibits. And tens of thousands of people have come to the Mcmullen to see the exhibits, brought to campus, many for the first time, many people who have never come before, to see the fruits of the collaborative work undertaken by the Boston College community, which is on display free of charge, unlike many other museums, in Nancy's original and particular vision of what a university museum should be. So good work, Nancy.
Thank you so much, Robin, for telling us in a very straightforward and very personal way about how Nancy has been such a major contributor to the university, not just at the museum, but also through the work that it has generated through inspiring other parts of the university to think about how we can use interdisciplinary study to attain the mission that Boston College has, to transform our students into global citizens. And I think we have maybe 1 or 2 minutes. I'm looking over in this direction. And I just wanted to ask the panelists if you'd like to respond to each other's comments. Let me start very broadly in that way. It's on.
I just want to second actually a lot of what Robin said, and I think that idea that Nancy has been sort of encouraging faculty to work collaboratively and interdisciplinarily has been huge. One works in one's little corner and you rarely get outside your department, but you get involved in one of these exhibitions, and especially if there's a catalog, you are finding people all over the university, as I did in putting together when Ash and I put together the catalog for the Weems exhibition. There were people in theology involved, people in art history, people in English. I mean, it was really quite a range. So that's been, I think, hugely stimulating for faculty who get involved. So thank you.
Yeah, very, very good point. I think we could all share our own stories about how that has enriched our scholarship and really transformed us, as you've all pointed out. Would any of you like to comment about what you might like to see, what you might like to do at the Mcmullen Museum in the future, if you have the seed for an exhibition idea, perhaps one that might involve the Schiller, but doesn't necessarily have to?
Well, I have an idea, but it may lead to an exhibit, but it may not. But Nancy has opened up the collections of the museum to me, and next semester I'll be teaching 12 really great undergraduate students through the late antique textile collection, and we'll put on an exhibit in the history department with photographs, but it may lead to an exhibit in the future.
Yeah, and let me follow up with those textiles that you'll be working on. I think there'll be lots of interesting scientific study to be done on them because they're archaeological orphans, which means that they've lost their archaeological context. So in order for us to work with them, we need to try to find out when they date, how they were made, what kinds of things were used to produce the dyes, how the weaving was done, and then maybe we can find out the traditions that were making them. And so, you know, pairing with the Schiller Institute to do some of those kinds of studies, or with the MFA scientific community to do that, and then our students as well. So.
Well, I think these comments that discuss how the Mcmullen connects to all parts of the university and where we're going in the future are a very good way for us to end this panel and to ask Provost Quigley to give his final remarks. Thank you.
Last thing I want to do is jump in and cut this short. I'd love to hear for an hour, but I know this is where the world of academic symposia, my geekish history, interest in history, and the world of advancement come into a little bit of collision course. I would urge you during the reception that is about to begin to engage with these four wonderful colleagues. I thank each of you both for the remarks and also for what you've done.